I'm Julie Samaka with Southern Charm Wreaths, where we make beautiful wreaths and teach you how to make and sell them. In this video, I want to talk to you about flower placement in your wreath. So I'm using this wreath as an example. This is the wreath I made and showed how my members how to make in my Wreath Making of the Month Club. One of the number one problems that I see with new wreath makers is their wreath, not that their wreaths become real compact, okay? I call it a stuffy wreath, even though there's nothing stuffy with it. There's nothing wrong with a compact wreath. They're just as beautiful, but they get a little bit afraid to come out of their comfort zone and have the flower come out of the wreath base. Flowers on this wreath come out about 6 inches from the wreath frame. Okay, so let me see if I can find my tape measure. So 6 inches. So from here to here, they come out that far. All right, so they come out about 6 inches. And when they do that, when your flowers come out that far, it produces a more airy wreath. It also produces a larger wreath. So this is an 18-inch wreath frame. And I'm gonna measure it just to show you how much larger it can be. All right, so this is from tip to tip. We've got about 34 inches long. And about 27 inches wide. So the typical door is, 3 feet, 36 inches? So this is going to be a spectacular wreath, isn't it, on the door? And it's vibrant. You'll be able to see it from definitely be able to see it from the road. So if your door sits way far back from the road, make sure to put a large wreath on the door so that it can be seen. Anyway, so the flowers come out pretty far from the wreath. You'll need to go back through and put some flowers in a little bit behind it. Now you don't have to put flowers. You can also use the greenery that's also on the bush itself. So you can fill in behind the flowers with just the greenery that comes from the flower bush, okay? Because you're basically using the same amount of flowers, aren't you, if your wreath is small and compact? But then if you start coming out with your flowers, you're making a larger wreath, therefore getting more bang for your buck for your flower dollars that you're spending. So that's number one for flower placement, is to make sure that your flowers come out a little bit more to add more dimension. It also makes the wreath a little bit wider, deeper too. So now the next thing I want to talk to you about is flower placement, is how to place them on the wreath, okay? So if you see that those sunflower flowers are my focal flowers. They're not necessarily touching. So they're evenly spaced all the way through, and I would put those flowers on first because I want to make sure they're placed evenly distributed, not like bunched up and that type of thing. So you can evenly space them and they don't necessarily touch for this style of wreath. I get asked all the time about the rule of 3. Do you know what the rule of 3 is? If you don't know what the rule of 3 is, I'm just going to tell you about it. So there's this rule that you should place your flowers in groups of 3, or ornaments, or whatever you're putting on your in your flower design. So I get asked all the time, do I stick to the rule of 3? And my answer is no, not all the time. For this wreath, I did not stick to the rule of 3. I don't want y'all to feel that you have to be sticking to any type of rules. Wreath making is fun. It's not supposed to be restricted by any rules by any means, right? So be free with your flower placement. Don't worry about any rules. You don't always have to stick to those rules. And you can see in this wreath, I did not. I just placed them evenly first, evenly around, and then I put in, made sure they weren't touching. And so if the flowers were the first thing on the wreath, that I can clearly see that it's going to be evenly dispersed, okay? So don't feel like you have to stick to any rules when you're making your wreaths. Another big tip for you guys for flower placement. One of the common problems I see are new wreath makers. They put their flowers in and they're all facing forward. Do you know what I'm talking about? Can you relate? Have you seen the wreaths where all of the flowers exactly are facing forward? And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, and that's a beautiful wreath too. I definitely don't want to discount anybody else's beautiful work, but I just think that when you do that, it doesn't look natural. It doesn't look, you know, like you've gone to the garden and picked your flowers and now you want to place them on a wreath. Does that make sense? Even though technically in nature, I guess they all do grow in one direction towards the sun, but when you're putting them on a wreath, you've got to think about this. People are going to be looking at your wreath in all directions, aren't they? They're going to be looking from the side. They're going to be, especially if you have steps leading up to your door like I do, they're going to be looking at the bottom first. So the first thing they're going to see is going to be underneath and then gradually move up. And then as they open the door, they'll see a different angle. And if they're like walking around the house and stuff, they'll see a different angle. So you have to keep that in mind, that your flowers should be placed to where the heads, I'm talking about these are the heads of the flowers, are, you know, some facing forward, some facing downward, some facing out to the side, some facing upward. So when you do that, you could it evenly disperses all of the color. So also take a look at the side of your wreath, okay? So stand there and look on the side, and when you do that, you should see color evenly dispersed. So I'm talking about the focal flower of the yellow should be evenly dispersed on the side, as well as my eye is looking also on the other side of the wreath. So I'm standing here and I'm looking across the front to the other side, and you can see how all of the yellow is just evenly dispersed. Let's see if I can show that on you see how it's evenly, so I'm standing here looking on this side, but you can see all the way to the other side that the yellow is evenly dispersed throughout. And that's because I've turned the flowers at the flower heads at different angles. So I hope that's a good tip for some of you. Oh, staggering your flowers. Okay, so when I talk about staggering your flowers, I'm talking about placing your flowers sort of in layers. So I told you I first put in my focal flowers, which is the sunflowers, and I've gone through and I did that, and I put them out about 6 inches from the wreath base, okay? So they're sticking pretty far out. But then I come back in and you're like, well, how do I put the rest of the flowers in, like the filler flowers and the flowers that aren't so important, that like the sunflowers are? I can use that as an area, as almost like an invisible line. I can go in and start placing my flowers towards the center. I'm talking about the filler flowers. Start placing them in towards the center. So if I've got this as an invisible line, I'm staggering the secondary flowers more in towards the inside of the wreath. So perimeter, and then start staggering your secondary flowers in more towards the center of the wreath. So those were just some tips on flower placements for making your wreaths. If you enjoyed this flower wreath and you want to learn how to make the wreath just like this, I would love for you to join me in the Wreath Making of the Month Club, and consider doing that. I'm going to put a link in how to do that below after the video is over, and I can't wait to have you join me. I'm looking forward to getting to know you better, and I'll see you inside the club.